Good evening and welcome to Nash County Committee Meetings. First of all, let me start by saying Happy New Year to everybody. I trust everybody had a wonderful, safe, productive Christmas and a prosperous New Year going into the upcoming year. We're going to start out today with the academic services with Sharonda Bullock. So Sharonda, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, good afternoon. I want to go ahead and do the roll call. We only have 2 items today, 1 action item, followed by information only. Chris Bissett.
Here.
Mr. Zach Gray.
Here.
Mr. Franklin Lamb.
Here.
Dr. LaShonda Washington.
Here.
Okay. All right, so I will turn it over to Mr. Chad Thompson with field trips.
Good evening, board members. So tonight we have 2 field trips that will be they're overnight trips to Greenville, North Carolina for our all-district band, and that would be Northern Nash and Southern Nash high schools. And superintendent recommends this for approval for the overnight field trip in the month of January 2023.
Okay, so at this time, I will accept a motion to approve the field trips.
So moved.
Second.
All right, so it's been moved and seconded. Chris Bissett,
Yes.
Zach Gray,
Yes.
Franklin Lamb,
Yes.
Dr. Washington,
Yes.
and I am a yes. Field trips are approved.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. And the next item is the Edmonton request for research with Ms. Robin Griffin, and it's for information only.
Good afternoon. Just as a reminder, since we're starting the new year, I thought I would bring us up to date with the board policy 5230 states that the superintendent may approve requests for research as long as they fit within the parameters of policies 4720, which have to do with student surveys, 4700, 4705, and 7825, which are related to FERPA guidelines. So this month, the superintendent has approved a request for research from Edmentum, which is the vendor partner of ours that we use for ExactPath. The study will focus on the outcomes of ExactPath as related to the students' EOG and EOC scores. So actually, they're doing a linking study to make sure that their results are in line with the North Carolina EOG and EOC results. So basically what they're asking in this linking study is for us to provide to them the student EOG and EOC scores at the end of the school year. And through that, there requires a letter from the superintendent to go to the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction authorizing that. So Dr. Ellis has approved this request, and this is for information only for you, and this is our only research request this month. Thank you.
Thank you. Did anyone have any questions? Okay, I'll turn it over back to Mr. Sharp.
Thank you, Sharonda. Our next item or committee meeting will be chaired by Dr. LaShonda Washington, Student Services Board.
Good evening. I'd like to call the Nash County Board of Education Student Support Services and Operations Committee meeting to order. I will do a roll call of committee members to ensure that a quorum has been established. Board member Bissett. I'm sorry, he is not one. Board
Yeah,
member-
I'm here, but I'm not on that committee, but yeah.
I'm looking at him on the screen. Board member Edwards.
Here, if I look like him.
You wouldn't be so lucky.
Dr. Chavis.
Here.
Board member Jenkins. Board member E. Bullock. Here. All right, and myself, a quorum has been established. All right, the first item, we have, 3 items to discuss today, 2 are for approval. The first item will be the, SRO, MOUs, and Dr. Farrell will be presenting that.
Good evening, everyone. So our main points is present the MOUs for SRO services from Nash County Sheriff Department and the Rocky Mount Police Department for Nash County Public Schools. You can see there were 2 attached documents there. The Rocky Mount Police Department SRO MOU and the Nash County Sheriff Department MOU. And those MOUs were for the remainder of this school year and the 23-24 school year. Nash County Sheriff Department, I'll start with that, will provide 9 full-time SROs not to exceed the limit of $750,000. That is to cover salaries, including benefits and supplies. That price amount does not mean that that is what we will pay, but that is to ensure that we're able to cover the SROs, and particularly with the addition of the 4 elementary SRO officers. As you can remember, when we wrote the grant at around $68,000 per SRO. And so I went over the matching funding that was given by the state and then what would be expected for us to pay. And so when I shared this information with you all early on, as you can see, it would be a cost saving to the district because of the amount of money that we received for the additional elementary SROs, and the fact that the state was paying also for our 6 middle school SROs, and the state had given $55,000, I think $55,480 per SRO for our high schools. So money that we have in the past paid out of our 069, that money would revert back to us, and money that we are not having to spend, not the total amount, but a saving up to almost $500,000 if it worked out to the penny, which is probably not, but it still creates a good saving point for our school district. Rocky Mount Police Department will provide 11 full-time SROs. They as well will be getting 4 elementary SROs to serve in the city elementary schools. We did ask for an additional SRO to be at Rocky Mount High School full-time. We know that with some of the stuff that has been going on and some of the surrounding communities and just some of the stuff that has been happening at Rocky Mount High School, we feel like that is a hot spot after having and I say a hot spot, but that is a situation that some things could happen and would benefit us to have a second SRO in place. I've had that conversation with Mr. Colvin, the principal. I've talked with the chief of police, and I've also had that conversation with Dr. Ellison, and we're all in agreement that we feel like a second full-time SRO should be at Rocky Mount. The other thing that we're doing that is not necessarily listed in this contract because we're paying as contract services is we are asking for part-time SROs to be at all of our other high schools. So in the past, we have not had a part-time SRO at Southern Nash High School. We have not had a part-time SRO at Northern Nash High School. So we are asking that take place. Again, that is not written in this contract because that is paid through contract services. We've always had a part-time SRO at Rocky Mount High School. So we're replacing that with a full-time, and we've always had a part-time at Nash Central High School.
All right, thank you, Dr. Farrell. Is there a motion to recommend the MOUs to the full board for approval?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. There's motion by Dr. Chavis and a second by Mr. Edwards for the record. I'll now do a roll call vote. Ish from the committee meeting. Okay.
Yeah,
After the vote.
No.
You want to have a discussion?
Yeah, I thought we do discussion before we.
Okay, is there any discussion from the committee members or the other board members present?
I just have a question and more of a clarification.
Go ahead, Mr. Edwards.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Farrow, just to make sure. So I hear 2 full-time at Rocky Mount High by Rocky Mount Police, correct?
That's correct.
And there'll be a full-time at Southern High now?
No, Southern has always had a full-time. We're adding an additional part-time.
So like a 1.5 then there.
Yes, sir.
At the middle school at Southern, will that still be a part-time?
The middle school is a full-time position. And that is partially covered through the grant this year and next year.
Okay, great. And one last thing, I know Nashville has been trying hard to get involved with this. Where does that stand for the elementary school?
I have had one conversation with the chief of police for Nashville. I explained to the chief that if they were interested in providing an SRO, that would have to come through our Board of Education. That was not a decision that was made by me. I kind of explained to him what we currently do with the Rocky Mount Police Department, Nash County Sheriff Department, and told him that if he had any further interest, he could reach back out to me, and then I could push it on to Dr. Ellis, who would then, bring it before the board.
Okay, and was he going to follow back up with you about that? Because, well, obviously he's been reaching out to some of us.
Yeah, he said he would, but I have not heard back from him. And if he has called and left me a message, it's not to my knowledge.
He hasn't discussed anything with me.
Okay, I was just making sure that his questions were at least being taken care of. That's all.
Mr. Shaw?
Yeah, so if I may piggyback on what Dean was just elaborating. So this is the MOU.
Mhm.
So this is a contract we're going into for previous 2022 and going into 2023.
We're going into for 22-23 and 23-24.
23.
Yes, sir.
So have we looked at what these costs are? Because we're going into a contract with no dollar sign. We see a total dollar signs. But can we see a breakdown of what we're spending, what this money is going to?
So what we can do is, once we are billed by the sheriff department and by the police department, because what I've asked Mr. Hill and his team to do is to ask both of those entities each month to send us an itemized bill by individual that we are paying, so that we know exactly what we are paying per officer. So I don't have that in front of me right now, but that is something that if you all would like to see at another meeting, I can make sure that I get from the finance department. But essentially what we're paying for is we're paying for the full salaries of each full-time SRO. That salary includes their benefits and any associated insurances.
So any associated insurances, things like clothing?
The only ones who we have in the past paid for uniform, we've paid for office supplies, we've paid for gas was Nash County Sheriff Department. And that has not been in the past 2 school years. That is written in the contract, but in the previous 2 school years, we have not paid any of that. The last time that I remember us paying any of those associated items was maybe the 18-19 or 19-20 school year, which came up to an approximate amount of maybe $20,000 to $25,000.
So what you're asking us to do is go into a contract, not knowing what the breakdown of the contract is going to be.
No, we know what the breakdown of the contract is. If you look at the Nash County Sheriff Department MOU, it spells out what we are paying for. We're paying for full-time services for 9 full-time SROs, in which we will take care of or reimburse the Sheriff Department for their full salary, which includes their benefits and any associated insurances.
I mean, reason I ask this question is basically, from my what I've seen, we're actually getting officers who are at the top of the scale pay. So if you
reimburse the sheriff department for their full salary. Who's that man?
okay. But what I mentioned in seeing this, because I understand we pay for, if the vehicle's parked in the lot, we pay the vehicle anyway.
No, we have not paid for the vehicles. Like I said, the only thing that we have paid for in the past has been, and that is written in the current MOU that we will pay for. I think the wording is supplies, which means we would pay for gas, we would pay for uniforms, and we would pay for office supplies. Again, we have not paid that in the past 2 school years. We did not pay that in the 21-22 school year for the sheriff department. We did not pay it in the 19-20 school year. The last one I remember seeing, I think, was the 18-19 school year. And that the amount that we paid for the full year came up to like $20,000 to $25,000.
Yeah, we'll take it.
So in reference to our highest paid officers, the first Rocky Mount Police Department has always been more of a cost in terms of SROs because their salaries are higher. The sheriff department have the more minimal salaries in terms of what we pay or reimburse. And so those officers are not their highest scaled officers. Now, when we look at the Rocky Mount Police Department and some of those instances, I think there's 3 or 4 of them who are some of their higher paid officers, some of them who are at the point where in a year or 2 years, they're going to retire. The conversation that I had with both Rocky Mount Police Department and the Nash County Sheriff Department before Christmas was that I needed them to work with us because I needed them to understand that we were working under a grant. We were working under a 2-year grant, and when the grant was written, it was written for $68,000 per officer. I know that they are trying to fill officer spots. I think Rocky Mount Police Department has about 40 openings. Nash County Sheriff Department has about 9. So they're trying to pull in 4 SROs while also filling their vacancies in their departments. And then the timeline that it takes to get an officer in, get them trained, and then get them in place where they can be an SRO. So there might be instances where we're going to have to pick up someone who's higher paid. But what I have asked them to do is to give us their promise that they will do their due diligence to keep an officer around at $68,000 as much as possible, knowing that there are going to be times when we have to go over that. Yes, sir.
Is there any other board members that have any discussion on this?
I like to comment about the SRO. Having had an SRO, you got to make sure we got the right fit in each school. That salary should not play into that, but to a certain degree. The right fit means a lot more than $5,000.
That's right.
Thank you for what you're doing.
Yes, sir.
All right, any further discussion? We do have a motion and a second to recommend the approval of the MOU to the full board. If there's no further discussion, I'll go ahead and we have a motion by Dr. Chavis for the record and a second. I'm sorry, the motion was by Dr. Chavis and the second by Mr. Edwards. Yeah, got it. All right, so at this time, I'll do a roll call to solidify the vote. I am a yes. Dr. Chavis?
Yes.
Mr. Jenkins?
Yes.
Mr. Edwards?
Yes.
And Ms. E. Bullock? Yes. All right. Motion approved. All right, next item on the agenda are the school safety plans. Dr. Farrell?
So with our school safety plans, we each year our schools are required to put their school safety plans on the state school safety risk management website platform. And that is a platform I think that I put in the presentation in the notes where you could click on. You have to have a password and access in order to get in there. But that is where all of our schools, school safety plans are warehoused. So our schools go in, they make the necessary changes to their plans, and then we work with Brent Fisher and Lewis Smith, who helps check our school safety plans to make sure that the needed information is in there. We also have some folks in our district who go in and look at some of the stuff, like Christy and her team goes in and look at EC placement of students to make sure that some of our students who have special needs, in the event of a safety situation, we know exactly who those students are, how many they are, and what type of care they would need to ensure that they are exiting the building safely. We also, I believe, Jeannie Kerr has access to look at some of the stuff that's placed there, as well as me. So once Lewis Smith goes in and gives the final thumbs up that their plan is approved, the schools go in and they publish their plans. Once they publish their plans, it's locked in that system. They then download a PDF version of their plan to a USB drive, which then comes to my office. So that way we have a copy of their most current plan here. They can always access their plan because they have the ability to lock and unlock their plan as long as they have access to the internet. And I also advise them to also put it on a USB drive, because they may not be able to gain access in the school, but they could take that USB drive and gain access somewhere else. Part of what we also do with our school safety is some of our school safety initiatives. In the presentation or the notes that I shared with you all, we talked about the active shooter video, which is shown every year at the beginning of school. That's a state requirement. It is also now, it's kind of been a state requirement really the past 3 or 4 years for schools to put their safety plans in this format. All school districts have not been doing it. We've been doing it for a long time now, but the state really cracked down this year and said, you must put your school safety plans in this format. So we're good. It's something that we've been doing for a long time. But what we also do is we do 3 lockdown drills each year. And the schools have to have law enforcement involved in at least one of their drills. And it has to be either the first or second drill. And the drill that law enforcement is involved in, the schools have to check their red emergency buttons to make sure that those buttons are working correctly. If they're not, there's a write-up that they have to send to me after each school lockdown. If I see that they're having issues with their emergency button or something else in their building, I send it to Shannon and his team to make sure that schools have what they need. Schools also have to do 2 tabletop activities with their faculty and staff. Those tabletop activities are directly related to things that may happen that's related to their school safety plan. What they have to do so that I have documentation of it is they have to send me a copy of the exact activity that they use with their staff, and they have to send me the list of their staff members with the date on who were present. And I keep record of that digitally. I also have a document where I keep up with the school when they did their lockdown drills. So I have the date, who sent it to me, and I do the same thing for the tabletop activities. And I also do the same thing and making sure when their red button was tested and if it was working or not. Schools must also do fire drills once a month. Those fire drills are done, and then that information is reported to Shannon Davis.
Thank you, Dr. Farrell, for review of the school safety plan. Is there a motion to approve the school safety plan to the full board?
So
Is there
Second,
a second? All right, it has been moved for the record by Board Member E. Bullock and seconded by Board Member Edwards. Is there any discussion?
one quick thing, if you don't mind.
Okay.
And Dr. Farrow, when you get up with Brent and Mr. Smith about the website, make sure all that information is checked as far as the board members for those respective sites. I noticed that was a little behind the other day.
Okay,
All right, any further discussion? If not, I'll go ahead and take the roll call vote. Board Member E. Bullock,
yes.
Board Member Edwards,
Yes.
Board Member Jenkins,
Yes.
Dr. Chavis,
Yes.
and I am a yes as well. There is one additional item for information only, and that is the random wanding update. Dr. Farrell, we're getting our money's worth.
yes. And I'll be brief, and if you have some questions, you can just ask me. But essentially what we're doing is starting on Monday with the random wanding process. We met on December the 8th at the high school roundtable meeting. And we talked through what the expectation was, and we allowed the principals to have some input in this process because they know what's happening at their schools. They know how they're bringing kids in, all of that. So we gave them an ability to have input in this process. And what we agreed to was basically, I said, these are the non-negotiable. These are the things that the board has already voted on and said that we have to do. So here's where you can have input by filling in some of the rest of this. So what we agreed to was things that was already approved by the board. And that principals would begin this process on January 9th, which is next Monday. I have sent them a document to look at to give me feedback on so that we can have a common document for how we document when they do a random wanding, so that it notates whether the child was a rider, a walker, driver, bus rider, or if they pulled out a specific number of classes. All of that would be on the sheet and would be that source of documentation. Also, what I put there was a space for them to notate if there were any contrabands or weapons found during that search. So this is kind of a new start for us. And it might not be perfect right from the start, but we will work through it and keep refining it until we get a solid process.
All right, thank you, Dr. Farrell. If there's no further business to come. Yeah.
Go ahead. You might ask the same question. Go ahead. Well, I would like to just make a comment. And I don't know if this is the correct place, but whatever, let me know. I was fortunate enough to go on a tour today to visit a school with a company, Evolve, with Dr. Farrell. And I wanted to go when I heard about it. I wanted to go because I know we need to do something for the safety of our children. And I had talked briefly with this company at the conference in November. And so I did go, and I was very, very impressed with the presentation that they did. And afterwards, I asked Dr. Farrell if there were a possibility that the board could actually see that full presentation. It didn't take all that long, but it was very interesting. And as I look at this wanding and this randomness of it, I know that we may possibly miss something one day. And that's all it takes to miss something one day. But with the presentation today, they can actually look at 4,000 students, I believe he said,
An hour.
in an hour. So none of our schools have 4,000 kids. So I think while winding is something for the immediate period of time, future, I think it would be great if we actually did look into this Evolve company. I think it would be really worth our time.
Thank you, Ms. Wood. Dr. Chambers?
Well, I would like to say I'm very much interested in seeing that presentation, but I was just curious the feedback you may have received from the principals during this meeting. How was it received? If you had any, if they had any ideas that they shared and we need to know about, I would love to hear it.
No, they certainly understood the urgency. The concerns for them was that they knew or believed that using a metal detector to have all their students come through would be a nightmare. They just felt like it was impossible to do just because of the amount of time it would take to go through and search each student. But they felt like this option gave them more flexibility in order to being able to get students into class in a timely manner, while also making secure school safety a priority. Yes, ma'am.
Also, as you say that, something comes to my mind. Talk about what they said today about if when the kids are going through the sensors.
Mm.
And they just walk through like you would walk through at the airport, except you don't stop and it's not metal. But that machine is so good that it can pinpoint if there's something that we need to take a second look at. That machine can pinpoint where it is on the body. So you can go directly to that particular point and not have to worry about trying to search somebody, the whole body. It knows whether there's something that you might need to take a second look at in the back pocket on the left side. It's just that specific.
So essentially, students come through, and Dr. Washington was at one of the schools as well. If students were coming through this as an interest, and this was one of the lanes that they were walking through. As students are walking through, they don't have to take their book bags off. They don't have to remove purses, none of that. They just walk. And if that machine sensors or pick up something that looks like a item that could cause some serious damage, like a bomb, or if it looks like a gun, it draws a red box around where it is on that person, whether it's on the hip, in their book bag, wherever it may be, and it takes a picture. So you have one staff member here who's monitoring the lane, and then you have another table off to the right, where if it takes a picture, it sounds an alarm, staff member pulls that student, takes them to that table. There's a still picture there of that particular student and where the item possibly could be on them. So you know exactly where you're looking at and where you need to search on that particular student.
Thank you. Awesome comments. I was impressed with what I saw today as well. Like Dr. Farrell stated, the winding is just a start. There is more to come from this committee, and as we move forward, as school safety is one of our most critical priorities. So thank you all for your comment. If there's no further business to come before this committee, I adjourn. Thank you, Dr. Farrell.
Thank you, Dr. Washington.
Are you gonna do some more? Or anything else?
No, sir.
We got our pay. Huh?
So the next item on the agenda will be the administrative services. Start out by roll call, Lane Dutton.
Here.
Dr. Chavis. Here. Franklin Lamb. Here. Rhonda Thomas Bullock.
Here.
Thank you. First item on the agenda is federal program identification. Ms. Morris.
Good evening, board members, Dr. Ellis. I have for you this evening some information on federal designations for our schools. and to seek approval of the certain school improvement plans, those schools that are identified as CSI or TSI. And we can actually go forward. Thank you. So there are 3 categories that I'm going to talk about tonight. The first is comprehensive support and improvement, or CSI. And then there are 2 TSI, targeted support categories. One is consistently underperforming and the other is targeted support. So when you look at comprehensive support and improvement, CSI, that is a list of the lowest 5% of our Title I schools in the state of North Carolina. And we'll talk about the schools in Nash County that qualify in that category. Under TSI, consistently underperforming, that is for schools that have a subgroup or subgroups of students, and the subgroup being 30 students or more, that received an F in the school performance grade for 3 consecutive years. And then the targeted, or the TSI additional targeted support, is you take that list of TSI consistently underperforming, and then if they don't meet the category of CSI highest performing subgroup, then they fall in that category as well. So it gets a little complicated when you're thinking about all the different ways a school could be identified federally, but those are the 3 categories that we're going to look at. And so when we think about CSI, that's your comprehensive support and improvement. We have 5 schools that are in that category that you'll see here. One is new, that's Baskerville Elementary. 4 are existing, have been on that list the prior time that they were identified. And on the next slide, it talks about some information for our CSI low performing schools. You will see there's tiers. So tier 1 means that the school is a newly identified school based on the 21-22 data. And then if it was a tier 2, they were previously identified in the cycle prior to that. 56 new schools were identified in the 22-23 school year, and 27 schools were re-identified. It is important to note we did have 1 school leave the list, and that was Rocky Mount Middle School, who was a CSI school previously. Under TSI targeted support, we have a list of schools here. There are 14 total. In parentheses, you'll see the subgroup or subgroups that received an F and also didn't meet that CSI standard. So you can identify what subgroup or subgroups need to be targeted. On the next slide, you'll see some information about that identification. I'll just highlight here that 892 schools were identified as TSI-AT, beginning with the 22-23 school year. One other note I'll point out, and it's near the bottom of the slide, any schools that are in this category that do not exit with the 24-25 school year will then become CSI schools. And so they would actually qualify if they don't exit and don't get that targeted subgroup up to a D for 2 consecutive years. Okay. And then we'll have a look at our TSI continuously underperforming subgroup. 16 total schools here. Again, you can see the subgroups that were identified. And then information about TSI consistently underperforming. Again, that would be a school that had at least 1 subgroup that received an F for 3 consecutive years. There were 1,041 schools identified as TSI-CU on the 22-23 list. When schools are identified in one of these federal designations, we have to notify parents of this, and that was done fall semester. In years past, TSI schools would qualify for some funds to help support that subgroup or subgroups and having them exit, but that was not the case this year. But the CSI schools did qualify for funding, and we submitted some plans to the state which have been approved, and funding has now been received for those 5 CSI schools. So Information on school improvement plans was shared in November of 22. Feedback was requested. As you can see here, it was placed on the website and communicated in other ways. And so all of the school improvement plans for every school, not just those that are TSI or CSI, are located on the About Us tab on each school website. And of course, the district plan was also shared for feedback as well. So I'm here this evening not only to share the list and the information on the federal designations, but to also request approval of these school plans, which is a requirement of ESAEA. Can I answer any questions?
I have to clarify the question because it always confuses me when I look at TSI. You know, the board just needs to remember the TSI are subgroups, which means like at Bailey Elementary, the one group that had the F was student with disability. That was all.
Correct.
You know, I think it's sometimes get misled. You start looking at all the, you know, you're looking at if I could point out something like Cooper's, which is a B, a C school, but it has one F, which is students with disabilities. And that group could be 30 kids. So if you got 31, that's net, you are not a TSI student.
Correct. Yeah.
So as you can tell, I'm not real fond of TSI. But it does allow you to target that certain group because that evidently is the group that schools should be focused on when they're looking at their school improvement plans. But I just always have
So it allows you to deep dive.
it allows you to deep dive, but it gives you a label, in my opinion, of a school where, you know, you got one subgroup that you need input on. So. That's it.
Thank you.
I just have a question. Is there a key or guide to what these are? Because I was looking through the subgroups. I'm so happy that you did point that out, because I was wondering what is SWD. So is there a key that we could look at that will let us know what we're actually seeing?
So you want to know what EDS is?
Yeah,
Yes,
Okay.
and ELS. and-
So it would be helpful if you have an acronym listing.
Yeah.
absolutely.
That
We
would be
can share that.
Get you there.
Yes, ma'am.
I would say that's a great question because so often when you're working in the profession, you hear those terminology every day.
That's true.
So if we go to your place and you go, we don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So I think it would behoove if you do that for the board so they'll understand.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Parents will ask us.
So most of our students with disabilities in English language,
Mhm.
yeah. Which is a high group for us, the ELS.
But we did have discussion on it as far as strategic planning, we talk about how we're gonna pull ourselves out, so thank you.
Just real quick, and I'm sorry, this is a stupid question.
No questions. Steve.
No.
In reading through this, I wasn't sure what we were, it's an action item, what we're, because we've already approved the strategic plan back in November correctly, and that's what the piece of this, the action piece of this is, but we've already approved it.
So, and thank you for that. Actually, the strategic plan, as you said, has been approved, and each school improvement plan is based on the priorities and the goals in the district plan. But a part of our ESAEA federal requirement and the monitoring that's going to happen next month is that our CSI and TSI plans also be board approved. So we are requesting that these TSI and CSI school improvement plans also be approved. Thank you. For those specific schools. Thank you.
Good question, Mike. It was. Any other questions? No other question, a motion to approve,
So moved.
and probably moved by Mr. Dutton, seconded by Dr. Chambers. Question or discussion, any further question or discussions? Hearing none, all those approved, would say aye. Any opposed? Ayes carried. TA, the bus driver proposal, Ms. Wallace.
Good evening and Happy New Year. Mr. Hill and I are going to tag team this presentation because I'm sure you're going to have some questions. With that being said, as means to address the concerns regarding the TA's weekly hours of employment, we have discussed some options that are possible options of resolutions. There are some pros and cons of each option that is listed for you, and it has been shared in the presentation, but I will talk through those options for you. Beginning with the TA pay options, we have options 1, and I think we're all aware of what brought us to this level, the discrepancy of are they paid for 37.5 hours or are they paid for 40 hours? So option 1, hourly pay. If we pay hourly, they will not receive a check at the end of August. They will have to work a full month and get paid at the end of September. This option with advance notice, however, will allow them to participate in the summer savings plan for 3 months. Option 2, this is if we, or if you decide that we will pay them for 40 hours per week. This is the preferred option based on the discussions that Dr. Ellis and Mr. Hill and I have had. Mr. Hill has had most experience with this option in his previous roles in other districts. In this option, you are treated like a salaried employee. You continue to submit a timesheet monthly. You're paid for 40 hours regardless of the time worked. You do have lunch duty and you eat with the kids. Principals will have to monitor this time carefully to ensure that they don't exceed the 40 hours per week. The negative of this option, the state allotments that we do receive for TAs will not support paying them 40 hours with the number of TAs that we currently have. That means that we will have to look at another funding source or possibly consider rifting or moving around. Option 3, we can leave it as it is for the duration of this year. They're paid at 37 hours a week at a minimum of $15.13 per hour. And comp time is provided or overtime if they exceed the 37.5 hours per week. So if the decision is made to allow TAs to work 40 hours, these are the options for the retro pay. Option 1, we retro pay back to August 2022 for hours worked beyond 37.5. This option is extremely time consuming because we have to revisit each timesheet. Possibly we'll need to contract with retirees to assist us with this task. We will determine funding sources responsible for the hours unpaid and check with principals to ensure that comp time hasn't been awarded. Principals will have to monitor this option for compliance. Option 2, we leave TA's hours at 37.5 hours. We continue to pay at $15.13 an hour for the duration of the 22-23 school year. Compensate for hours from August to December of 2022. Timesheets are required and principals will have to continue to monitor for compliance. Moving on to the TA bus driver options. We have looked at really one option that we feel makes sense. Tier levels of TAs. And if we tier the levels, you'll have a TA level 1 and a TA level 2. The TA 1 would be your regular TA, and they're paid on the state scale. At the tiered level 2 will be a TA that is a /TA bus driver. We pay them at a higher rate of pay. That amount is to be determined, and they will be required to drive when needed or have an AM or PM route. We also discussed devising a TA committee, and this committee would help us with finalizing decisions, and they would also help us gather input from all of the stakeholders, primarily the TAs, allow them to vote on which option they like best, and allow for suggestions, recommendations for other options that they may agree upon. That meeting date is to be determined, but we do plan to meet in January, depending on the outcome of these options. Questions?
Yeah, let me start out by this. This is an action item. You have multiple options. You're gonna have a committee meeting, TA committee meeting, discuss what's favorable. So are you looking for this committee to do what tonight?
The approved part is TA pay. The TA bus driver is what we will form the committee for to get additional input.
So TA pay, we have option 1, 2, and 3.
Yes,
And retro pay for TAs, we have a lot of options 1 and 2. All
yes,
this is TA, correct?
yes.
And the next slide, line 3, is also TA.
This depends, really, this is, if you decide to go the 40 hours and we have to retro. And either way, we're gonna have to retro back to August.
So you want this committee to make a determination which one we want to do to present to the full board on Monday night.
Yes, sir.
Now, we would like option 2
We said option 2 was our preferred option.
would be the option that would make it easier, cleaner. Most districts do this like, you know. But what it would do is at 37.5, you're getting it 2.5 back because TAs are now in the lunchroom with the students. So that's going to give them the 40 because they're not taking lunch. They're with those kids. They get a 15-minute and a 15-minute
Yes, sir.
afternoon in the morning. Afternoon, yeah.
And you want to vote tonight on this?
So,
But we only vote.
Question board.
yes,
So are we saying that the time that these TAs start and the time that their day ends would be the same as it is now? The only difference would be the lunchtime, and that lunchtime is spent with the children, which they do already. So how do we compensate them now for their lunch? Is their lunch hour a paid lunch hour now?
So they monitor the students most of the time in the cafeteria, but they have a separate 30 minutes for lunch.
Okay.
Mhm.
But with this,
With
they would
this
not have
option,
that
they
30
would not
minutes.
receive that.
Okay.
That's right. Yes, ma'am.
that's just like an hour lunch, hour pay. 15-minute breaks, and you're working the 30 minutes with the kids.
Yes, sir.
So how would that 40 hours work with them driving a bus?
They will be paid overtime
If it's over 40.
if it's
They would
over
already
40,
be over 40.
but they're gonna go over 40 if you pay them 40 hours a week regardless.
And what is the overtime going to be rated at?
If they made
Time and a
set
half.
$15 an hour, they'd be making, what is that, 22, 3?
Time and a half.
Time and a half.
Time and a half. Mhm.
It's not bad,
And maybe that would help us out.
but I think that having that conversation with TAs, with the committee, is going to help us determine how many do we think would volunteer to do something like this? Because they would get paid a higher rate all the time. It's not just when they drive a bus. If a regular TA gets 15, their TA1, say a TA2 gets 17, they're getting 17 all the time.
And you may not be driving.
And you might not drive a bus Monday, Tuesday.
That was my question. Be driving.
And
That's right.
But that would remove the requirement that all of our TAs become bus drivers.
Correct.
Mhm.
And then after we do this and say we only get 2 people to take this, then we're gonna then have to talk about mandating this first group of TAs with bus license. Because this is the only thing else we can do, in my opinion.
Context.
I like and would be in favor of recommending option 2. Because it looks like you have done a lot of research in this, and I definitely like the idea of having the stakeholders involved in the committee piece. I think that's gonna give more ownership to this. And hopefully when it's explained that that would be a benefit, which this truly looks like a benefit to be part of, I hope you'll have those volunteers.
Dr. Ellis,
Yes, sir.
just running figures through my head and everything else, especially with the 160, it looks like the way it sits, you're doing a 40-hour work week, obviously, but you're doing a monthly timesheet, correct?
Correct.
So if a driver, a TA/bus driver does do 43 hours 1 week, they may not necessarily get that 3 hours of overtime if they end up taking 3 hours of sick leave or something else on the second week, or they end up going home early, or they end up with some type of comp time.
That's
You're right, it's gonna all have to add up, Mr. Everett, you're right, it'll have to add up.
Yes.
Okay, I just want that to be clear to some of the folks who don't understand time at the younger ages, that just because they drive a bus and are out 13 hours one day doesn't mean they're going to get an overtime check that week or that month.
Correct,
That's
it's got to
correct.
add up in the end.
That's right.
Any other questions? Before we get to a vote on this one, recommendation, a motion, I just want to clear up this in my head on slide number 4. TA committee. If we make the motion, option 2, does that not take away to allow them to vote, or bullet point 2, allow them to vote on which option they like best?
The TA committee, Mr. Sharp, to clarifies for the TA bus driver options.
Okay, just the bus
Yes, sir.
driver option.
Mhm.
Okay,
We have to take care of the salary, 37.5 or 40 hours. It's two, yes.
I thought
It's
that
two
was
issues.
because of the bus driving. You're saying even if they don't drive the bus, we gotta take it preferably to 40 hours in option 2.
At the last committee meeting, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Bullock, she would not move forward with the TA bus driver until we cleared up
Right.
the 37.5 hours or the 40 hours. What are they paid as? After our investigation, they're paid as 37.5 hours, but they're paid at a higher rate at $15.13 versus the $15.
any other questions or discussions? If not, I need a motion.
Cool. Can non-committee members ask a question?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay,
Yes.
so based on going to the 40 hour per week, pay scale, that would potentially increase everybody's salary.
Right.
How would that affect long-term the number of TAs that we have, knowing that we're paying out more money per TA? Would that cause us to have to look at reducing the number of TAs we have?
Yes, and I did state that. I said the state's allotment does not support it because for TAs, we don't get a number allotment or position allotment. We get a dollar allotment, which is going to exceed our budget.
And we don't have a solution.
We would have to consider a different funding source, or we would have to consider rifting or moving into other positions. And we're already
other
over,
district.
yes.
that Mr. Hill was familiar with, and I was too. That is exactly what happened when we went to 40 hours a week.
Okay.
Because it was set up, when you start calculating that, you're pushing people out.
Okay.
So
How many TAs do we have?
Yes, well, hold on a second.
I'm sorry.
I do, yeah.
20,
And
120, 119, 120, somewhere in that range.
and at this time, with what we're dealing with, can we afford to lose any TAs? I just gotta ask that question.
We can't afford to lose anybody.
There you go. So we gotta, okay. I'm just.
Back to my question. We have 19,
119,
119.
Yes, ma'am.
TA.
and we are allotted at 99. It's 99.
So we need to find, funding then for 20,
Approximately. Yes,
approximately
ma'am.
20 more. Do the math for me. How much money are we talking?
I think based on their with benefits, it's about 39,000. Who has the calculator? 39,000 times 20.
I think it's over there.
40
The-
and 20
the-
is 800, about 800.
The reason I'm asking is that I agree, I don't see how we can lose any TAs. And I certainly wouldn't want us to lose any TAs. So then my next thought would go to how can we find the money to support this? Because I think it only fair that we compensate these people either with dollars, which I think they would prefer. In my past life, a study was done, and the people that were studied said they would prefer time off work rather than the dollars. So not you. I mean, and in my office, that proved to be true. People would much rather leave work early and not be docked than get the extra dollars. Because they really don't add up in our situation all that much. With the TAs, I'm not so sure. But I make the point because we need to do something. And we definitely need to compensate our people for the work that they do. The TA/bus driver is a different thing altogether. So I think we're talking about two separate
It is. You're right.
things here.
You're right.
And I think what we really need to do is look at first how much we can find in the budget to increase the line item dollars that the state gives us so that we can compensate these people with dollars rather than comp time. And my question then is, has that actually been done? Have we been looking for places to draw money from?
So I'm going to share with you what we've done, and then Mr. Hill, you can share any information. So when we got ESSER funding,
Mhm.
we knew we were over TAs at that time, but we supported them because we had additional funding. And with that being said, that has allowed us to support these additional positions for 3 years or up to 3 years. Christy Grant's back there, I believe. EC carries on a lot of EC TAs. Federal programs carries on a lot of TAs. But we have looked at positions that we may have to do away with once the funding goes away and once the demerger happens as well. So we do know that we have a fund balance, but you know, if you keep going back and forth into that, eventually that's going to dwindle down to nothing. I can't guarantee that we have other funding sources moving forward. We do right now because of ESSER, but after that leaves us, we
Yeah,
have to
that's the
prepare
part.
and plan. Yes, ma'am.
And you need to think about, but I don't forget, my first year, when we started figuring out where all the allocations were with
That's
TAs, teachers, a lot of that money was taken out of local. And I'm gonna tell you time and time again, you don't need to pay for TAs, teachers, these big positions out of local money because we can't support it.
Right.
So we took out about 30 some then.
Yes, sir.
And it was only because of vacancies and resignations that we were able to make it and then get a streamlined budget. And now you don't want to start
going into that local, especially if there's a demerger happening, we need to start thinking about, we gotta cut, because we're gonna be losing. So I just want you to think about that. Now, we can, I mean, Mr. Hill, Ms. Wallace and I can sit back again and start looking at this and show you, because I really think you're thinking that TAs are those, or TAs are mainly those assistants in the classroom with teachers. Some of those TAs aren't. We got other positions, or we call them TA. There are a lot of that, but they're not TAs in the classroom. We might need to think about that. But before we start pushing in local and that type of money, we might want to go back and kind of explain to you where these positions are. And that might help you out.
Also, Ms. Bullock, TAs, they are only allotted for elementary. And I remember when we were really struggling with some of the positions, we had multiple, and trying to clean up the allotments. Ms. Dancy Smith and her team gave 10 positions, because the state doesn't require that we have TAs in 4th and 5th grades. So high schools could have some support, ISS, deans of students, things like that.
And Mr. Chair,
Can you come to the mic?
Sorry to speak out of turn. I just wanted to mention to you that the allotment that we get from the state for teacher assistants is for K3. So the TAs that we have in K3, that's what that funding is designed for, not for 4th and 5th grade and high schools, et cetera, et cetera. And as Dr. Ellis mentioned, we do have some people that where a principal may have gotten a teacher assistant, a position through their staffing allotment. They might have decided, I need them in the office more so. So they're using them as an office support person, but yet they're still classified as a TA. In my budget work right now, which is still ongoing because there's a lot of people and a lot of movement, I have managed to clean up some things, I think, where we've had people paid out of local that should have been paid in state, and trying to truly maximize the benefit of the allotments that we get as a district. And still got some work left to do on that. But again, there may be some available funding through some other allotments like low wealth or disadvantaged at risk. You know, there may be some additional funding once it all settles in that we could use some of those funds to take care of some teacher assistants as well. I'm going to go ahead and say this. Part of the issue that we're facing right now is the current teacher assistant salary schedule is based on 37.5 hours a week. Some of the principals are allowing their TAs to work in excess of that. And a TA may work 37.5 hours this week. They may work 40 next week. They may work 39 the next week. Technically, they're supposed to be working 7.5 hours a day and go home. But part of the issue that's come up is because some of these TAs are not working. And the question was brought up, well, I work 40 hours, but I'm only getting paid for 37.5, and we need to make that right. So again, as Ms. Wallace pointed out, we have a couple of options. You know, you can pay them by the hour because they are technically, according to fair labor standards, hourly employees, and they should be paid based on a timesheet. But that means they don't get paid in August like they do, like teachers do, because technically they're kind of prepaid as well. They wouldn't get a check until they've actually worked the hours. So that would put people that are not exceptionally high on the salary scale at a disadvantage because they would have to go a month without pay. So what the districts that I've worked in, and the one that Dr. Ellis and I worked in together, we paid them 40 hours as if they were salaried. They still submitted a timesheet, as Ms. Wallace mentioned, but we just paid them 40 hours a week, and they worked the 40 hours a week. So that's kind of what we're presenting to you.
Principals have to regulate and make sure they're 40 hours a week.
Even so, and if you decide to leave it at 37.5, then the principals need to make sure that their employees are working 37.5 and not allowing them to work over. Or if they do, then they need to keep up with. I don't even know technically if comp time should come into play, and I apologize, I'm not trying to muddy the water, but I think as Mr. Edwards was alluding to earlier, comp time and overtime do not come into play until someone has actually worked 40 hours for the week. So if I've got 44 hours this week, but I took 8 hours off for annual leave, I might get that extra time at regular time, but I would not be entitled to time and a half. So that's part of the issue. But what we did in prior districts is we paid them 40 hours. They submitted a timesheet. And frankly, it made it easier on payroll because everybody just got a flat amount every month, just like they do, and just like salaried employees. So it just made it easier for staff, to work that way.
I'm in favor of option 2 for several reasons. We have a morale issue with the things that have been happening in our community and dissatisfaction from our bus drivers and the difficulty of getting good drivers. And I did not like the idea of trying to force adults to do something. I think this is a situation where it's to everybody's advantage. I think it will, like you said, it makes it easier on payroll. It shows we care about our employees. I think they should be paid real money for the time and not comp time off. I have a real light bill. Time off isn't gonna help me if I'm sitting home in the dark. So I like this idea. And I think we need to make a statement to our bus drivers at some point that we value them. And I think this is something that would motivate people to want to volunteer because they are going to be rewarded. And we are saying in a very direct way, you are a human being that we value and treasure, and we want to treat you right. So that would be the one I would recommend that we take to the full board. And if that needs to be a motion, I make it.
Well, we can't afford to pay.
Well, we've got to find, if we rip them, if you keep neglecting them, they're gonna leave you anyway. Everybody has signs up saying help wanted.
Yeah.
So you may discover if we talk to our county commissioners and if we're taking the stand that we value these employees, they've made that statement to other county employees or here in the county. So I think they know we're trying to do the right thing with our community, and we may be getting some support, even though we don't want to use local money. We just need to explore and get creative, but we're gonna lose them either way.
Could that not save us money in the long run? Because I've seen, depending on how our TAs vote for the bus driver, whatever, districts paying $2,000 and $3,000 signing bonus for bus drivers. If this goes before our TAs and they decide they like the idea of the TA2 or whatever, can we use any money out of transportation to pay for the cost if they become bus drivers?
Well, transportation would have to take on at least part of the overtime responsibility. What we
That
did.
would be a win-win situation for both sides.
Well, if the TAs were agreeable, to drive the bus, then technically the state allotment that we use to pay bus drivers would avail itself then to cover some of this overtime for the TAs. In other words, we wouldn't be paying the bus drivers, but we'd be using that funding as overtime to help pay for the TAs overtime for driving the buses if they were to do so.
And that may save us money in the long run because we won't have to pay a $2,000 or $3,000 signing bonus to get somebody that's not in our school to drive a bus. If enough TAs decide they would rather go that route than drive a bus.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So what is the timeline that we're looking at? I mean, I know that we want to make a decision as quickly as possible, but I feel like there's still like so many questions. Just, and I understand and I respect the preferred option, but I still have a lot of questions about it. And I feel like I personally need more time to just process and ask questions. And I don't know that, the next 10, 15 minutes that we can come to a solid enough agreement on how to move forward. So and also, if we're going to have a TA committee, I think this is almost a bigger issue that we should consider bringing to that table for discussion before we make a decision, because this is just so much more difficult and murkier than some of the other issues. Is that a possibility that we can just stick a pin in it? And I know we need to make a decision. We always need, there's always a rush, but at the same time, I think there's just so many questions that are still out there. And I would like to hear from the TAs themselves, especially now that we're talking about forming this committee, and having those conversations. And this is this should be a really big part of that conversation.
So I think we could easily just make sure Ms. Wallace's group, we schedule that TA committee. And then show them these options, the PowerPoint, show them the transportation, TA1, TA2. And then probably let us show you where this TA, so where are our TAs at? So you kind of know where they are.
Let me just interject this real quick. Sharonda, because that's a great point, and that's the point I was alluding to about the other options. But we do have I think.
I'll withdraw my motion because I like that idea.
Okay, we can do that.
So with that said, we'll withdraw that motion. And I would ask that we would make this, make a motion that we,
It's an information.
as an information item only.
Thank you.
So I do have another question though. We have, you're talking about true TAs, okay, pre-K through 3. Or K through
K through 3.
true TAs. But we have TAs spread out throughout all levels. How many true TAs do we have? I got 120, Dr. Ellis said 120. 120 actual true TAs from K through 3?
You want to know, no. You want to know specific where they're at.
That's right.
Okay, we can do, that's what I was telling you. Well, we can do that for you.
So if I'm a TA, and if you're gonna give me the option of driving the bus and get $2 more an hour, I'm gonna say I'm gonna drive a bus, even though I may never drive a bus. So if you look at every one of those TAs and decide, hey, I wanna be the 2 level, and we know they're not all gonna drive a bus, how much that's gonna impact you as far as financial?
Well, keep in mind too, they would also have to pass, the CDL licensing and all of that. And typically the district pays for that as well. So that would be an additional expense.
That's right.
It's not incredibly expensive, but again, you're looking at probably about $150 or so per person for the license.
You'll be there on Friday afternoon with a bus. You got a 35, 40 children want to go home, but.
Well, and and your goal in all this is to make sure that we have full-time drivers.
That's right.
We want to try to find a full-time driver. And that's what the new director's job is going to be. You find full-time drivers. Then I'm gonna have my second tier of subs that just say, all right, I got a bus out today. I'm gonna drive this for my school. Bam, I'm on it. I'm gonna do my hour and a half. I'm clocking it in.
Any further discussions? Great conversation. Lots of good, great work around this piece. Thank you very much.
I just have one more comment. And
Yes, ma'am.
This is just from talking to the TAs that I've spoken to, and some of those are TAs who have been here for years and years and years. But I just want to put it out there. One of the main concerns that I was hearing was, we say you only have to drive for this school, but then it ends up, well, we get in these tight spots over and over again. And I just want to make sure it's clear that if this does happen, that they only drive for their school. I think that's a bigger deal than what we realize, for lots of different reasons. But I just want to make sure that that's stated clear, and we're all on the same page, that there won't be those exceptions that become rule eventually because we just kind of look past it. But I think it's a really big deal for the TAs who will, could potentially volunteer if they are assured and that we follow through with that.
I hope that will entice them to drive, making $20-some an hour, because if this doesn't work, and I'll put this on the record, if we can't get bus drivers at $23 an hour, we got to do what I was telling this bullet. We got to go ahead and bite the bullet, and everybody's going to have to get a license, because it's not going to be about, I'm not going to drive for this school or not, because we're going to get in all that again. I'm telling you, if this doesn't work, we're going to have to make a decision and say, you're going to have to drive the bus.
And so
Or we're not going to have, or we're never going to solve this.
Sharonda, so I'm clear. Your question was driving buses for the specific schools?
Right. So it's not, like, I understand what your point is, Dr. Ellis. It's not driving the bus. We're past that part. But I think as we've introduced this, we've said we want volunteers, but you'll drive for your school. And I don't know if that's actually on this presentation, but it's something that we've said publicly. I just want to make sure that that's still the plan and that we're all clear. I'm fine with volunteers, and I get that even if we have to take the next step, I would still venture to say, like, yeah, you have, if it does become, we have to have some mandatory, whatever, that those TAs still drive for their school. I think it's just an easier lift for the school, for the students, for the overall program. So not whether or not you will have to drive, but can we try to make sure that they only drive for that school?
I just don't want to put limits on a person that might want to drive for another
Right,
school.
right. And I understand
That
that
person's
too.
gonna be making, if they're on the southern side, they're making $50 a day. If they take a route from Red Oak to Northern, or they're gonna make some good money. So I just want to make sure if that's all they're gonna drive for, I agree with that, but I still want to put in there, you can drive for multiple schools if you feel like you
Right,
want the money, we're gonna pay you.
right.
The hard thing about it, years ago, they got lied to start with. That's what stirred up. the whole-
Right, and I agree with that. When I met with the TAs, they showed me
You
that.
got some K3 TAs. They don't have a clue about middle school and high school discipline. And the first time they drove for the middle school, I'm turning in my bus line. I don't want that anymore. No matter if it's $30.
That's right.
Anything else? Thank you for doing this job. Appreciate it. There no other meeting schedules. So with that, we are adjourned.